My son's ex-wife left her kids with me to chase her addiction, then returned with a lawyer demanding her children back. Subscribe now and comment where you're watching from. This story might just save a family, you know. The pounding on my door at 3 a.m. sent my heart racing. I clutched my robe tighter, fingers trembling as I peered through the peephole. The hallway light flickered, casting eerie shadows across the familiar face I'd hoped never to see again. There stood Vanessa, my son's ex-wife, swaying slightly, pupils dilated in that all-too-familiar way. Behind her, two small shadows huddled together against the rain, their little bodies drenched and shivering. The bitter scent of alcohol and something chemical clung to her as she pushed past me. "Just for a few days," she slurred, her words slipping together. "I promise, Margaret. Got some things to sort out." My grandchildren, Jason, 9, and Emily, 6, stood in my entryway, soaked and silent. Their eyes held the vacant resignation of children who'd learned not to ask questions. Jason gripped his sister's hand so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Emily's stuffed rabbit dragged on the floor, one ear torn, collecting dirt. "Kids, why don't you go to the spare room? Remember where it is?" I kept my voice steady despite the rage and grief churning inside me. A flash of lightning illuminated their pale faces, followed by thunder that made Emily flinch. As they trudged upstairs, dragging small backpacks behind them, Vanessa grabbed my arm. Her nails, chipped and dirty, dug into my skin, leaving crescent marks. "You owe me this," she hissed, her breath hot and sour against my face. "After what happened with David?" "Don't." The word came out sharper than I intended, slicing through the tension. "Don't you dare blame my son for what you both started." Her laugh was hollow, echoing in the dim hallway. Still the sanctimonious bitch. "Look, I need to handle some things. Business opportunities. I'll be back before you know it." I watched her stumble back to the waiting car, the same vacant look in her eyes that I'd seen in David's before he overdosed last year. 3 rehab attempts, paid with my retirement savings, hadn't been enough to save him. The car's taillights disappeared into the rain-slicked darkness, and somehow I knew she wouldn't return. "Grandma?" Emily's small voice floated down the stairs. She clutched her rabbit, water still dripping from her hair. "Is Mom coming back soon?" The lie caught in my throat as I climbed the stairs, my joints protesting. "Let's get you both dried off and into bed. We'll talk in the morning, sweetheart." Later, watching them sleep in my spare bedroom, their breathing finally steady after hours of silent tears, I allowed myself to cry. The financial statements on my kitchen table, what remained of my savings, the second mortgage I'd taken to pay for David's treatments, blurred through my tears. The wind howled outside, branches scraping against windows like desperate fingers. 6 months later, I sat in family court, gripping temporary guardianship papers while a social worker assessed me with clinical detachment. The courtroom smelled of furniture polish and desperation. "Mrs. Wilson, given your age, these children would likely benefit from a more suitable long-term placement," she suggested, not unkindly, tapping her pen against a thick folder. The public defender beside me shifted uncomfortably, his overworked face grim. "My client has been their primary caregiver since their mother abandoned them. Separating the siblings through the foster system would cause additional trauma." I leaned forward, arthritis protesting in my fingers and knees. "I promised my son before he died that I would protect his children." My voice didn't waver. "Unlike some people in this room, I don't break my promises." The judge studied me over his glasses, his expression unreadable. "Temporary guardianship is granted, with quarterly home visits. Mrs. Wilson, you understand this arrangement can be revisited if the biological mother completes rehabilitation." I nodded, though we all knew the truth. Vanessa wouldn't be back, not until there was something in it for her. As we left the courtroom, Jason looked up at me, his father's eyes staring from a child's face. "Are we going to be okay, Grandma?" I squeezed his shoulder, ignoring the twinge in my back. "We're going to be just fine," I said, ignoring the weight of uncertainty pressing down on my chest and the mountain of difficulties that loomed before us. 10 years later, I woke before dawn to finish hemming Emily's debate team skirt. My arthritic fingers protested as I pushed the needle through the fabric, but there was satisfaction in completing it before the 6 a.m. alarm. The soft yellow glow of my bedside lamp cast long shadows across the worn carpet, and outside, the first birds had begun their morning songs. The mantel clock, The one possession I'd kept after selling most of my belongings, chimed softly. Next to it stood photographs documenting a decade of quiet sacrifices. Jason at the piano I'd purchased by selling my wedding rings, Emily receiving her science award, both children at the beach last summer, finally looking carefree after years of nightmares and therapy sessions. I quickly stashed the pile of social service reports into my bedside drawer when I heard movement upstairs, the familiar creak of floorboards that announced someone was awake. These quarterly visits had become routine, but the fear never diminished. One wrong assessment, and they could still take my grandchildren away. The latest report had noted concerns about my advancing age and long-term sustainability of the arrangement. "Morning, Grandma," Jason called, now a tall 19-year-old with his father's gentle eyes and a musician's graceful hands. He patted down the stairs in sock feet, hair still rumpled from sleep. "Made you coffee, the strong kind." "My hero," I smiled, hiding the unpaid medical bills under a cookbook. The rich aroma of coffee filled the kitchen, momentarily masking the smell of the leaky pipe I couldn't afford to fix. "Big day today?" He nodded, excitement brightening his features as he pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "The Juilliard pre-selection letter should arrive. Mr. Abernathy says I'm a shoo-in, especially after the state championship." I didn't mention that his piano teacher had offered free lessons for the past year, or that the application fee had meant skipping my heart medication for a month. Some sacrifices were better left unspoken. Emily bounded down the stairs, every inch a 16-year-old whirlwind of energy and contradiction. Her debate team jacket hung loosely on her frame. She'd grown taller again, outpacing my sewing skills. "Grandma, did you finish my skirt?" "The debate's at 4, and Jason promised to record it before his work shift." She grabbed an apple from the bowl, polishing it against her sleeve. As they ate breakfast, sunlight streaming through the faded curtains, I studied them with quiet pride. Despite everything, they were thriving. Jason's music scholarship prospects looked promising, and Emily's scientific mind had already garnered college interest. Somewhere, David was watching, and I hoped he was proud too. After they left for school, backpacks slung over shoulders, a chorus of "Love you, Gran," floating behind them, I allowed myself to sink into a kitchen chair, exhaustion washing over me like a physical wave. The house felt suddenly quiet, amplifying the tick of the clock and the drip of the faucet I kept meaning to fix. Dr. Reynolds had been insistent yesterday, his bushy eyebrows furrowing with concern. "Margaret, you can't postpone this surgery again. Your heart won't take it. The mitral valve needs repair now." After Jason's final audition, I'd promised, avoiding his disapproving stare. "Just 2 more months. I need to be there for him." Now I pulled out the box marked David Insurance that I'd been postponing examining. My son had mentioned life insurance for the children before his death, but I'd been too overwhelmed with immediate needs. Therapy sessions, nightmares, school supplies, to investigate fully. The box smelled faintly of his aftershave, a ghost of memory that made my eyes sting. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. It was Patricia, our social worker for the past decade, her familiar clipboard tucked under one arm, her sensible shoes squeaking slightly on the linoleum. "Just a friendly visit," she said, though her eyes scanned for deficiencies, the peeling wallpaper in the hallway, the taped-up window in the living room. "How are things, Margaret?" "Jason's been pre-selected for Juilliard," I said proudly, offering her tea from my chipped but clean teapot. "And Emily's debate team is competing regionally, first in her class in chemistry, too." Patricia nodded, making notes in her ever-present file. "And your health? Margaret, you seem tired today." I straightened my shoulders, pushing away the constant ache. "Never better. Just stayed up late finishing Emily's skirt. You know teenagers. Everything's an emergency." Her expression softened momentarily, the professional mask slipping. 10 years. You've done remarkably well under difficult circumstances." Later, watching Jason practice for his upcoming concert, fingers dancing across keys that had cost me my home equity, I whispered to David's photograph on the piano, "It was worth every penny, son. Every single one. Your children are going to have the chances you never got." The high school auditorium buzzed with excitement on Jason's graduation night. The familiar smell of floor polish and perfume hung in the air, mingling with the nervous energy of parents and graduates. I smoothed my one good dress, navy blue, purchased 15 years ago for David's college graduation, and took my seat in the front row. My hands shook slightly as I adjusted the small corsage I'd made from flowers in my garden. "Ladies and gentlemen, our valedictorian and recipient of the Regional Music Excellence Award, Jason Wilson. Applause thundered as my grandson took the stage, tall and confident in his graduation gown. The stage lights caught in his dark hair, so like his father's, as he adjusted the microphone. His speech was eloquent, moving several teachers to tears, but I was distracted by a figure slipping into the back row. Even after a decade, I recognized her immediately. Vanessa. My chest tightened, a familiar pain spreading beneath my ribs. She looked different, polished, put together, her once wild hair now styled expensively. I gripped my purse tighter as the principal announced, "Jason will represent our district at the National Young Pianist Competition next month, competing for a $50,000 grand prize." I watched Vanessa lean forward, her attention suddenly razor-sharp, like a predator scenting prey. Her eyes never left Jason as he spoke about dreams and perseverance. I wondered if anyone else could see what I saw, the calculating gleam behind her smile. After the ceremony, we gathered in the crowded hallway. Emily bounced excitedly on her toes, adjusting the lei of flowers she'd made for her brother. Jason, surrounded by well-wishers, kept glancing my way, his smile radiant. We were taking photos, the elderly shop owner from next door kindly offering to capture the moment. When she approached, transformed, designer clothes, healthy complexion, clear eyes, no trace of the woman who'd abandoned her children on my doorstep in the middle of a storm. "Hello, my darlings," she said softly, her voice carrying over the crowd noise. The camera slipped from my fingers, clattering against the linoleum. Emily froze mid-smile, color draining from her face. Jason's arm around my shoulder stiffened, his entire body going rigid. "Mom?" Emily whispered, the word foreign on her tongue, as though she were speaking a language she barely remembered. Back home, tension filled my kitchen as Vanessa perched on a stool, looking oddly out of place among the worn countertops and faded curtains. Her designer purse sat on my scratched table like an alien object. The children watched her every move, fascinated and wary, like scientists observing an unpredictable experiment. 3 years sober, she explained, showing photographs of a modest California home with desert landscaping. "I work at a rehabilitation center now, helping others recover. It's my way of making amends, I suppose." Her eyes welled with tears that seemed almost genuine. The afternoon light caught the expensive highlights in her hair as she leaned forward earnestly. "I don't have excuses for abandoning you. The addiction took everything, my judgment, my compassion, my maternal instincts." Her voice broke convincingly. "I just want to know my children, if you'll let me." I noticed Jason's expression, cautious but curious, a muscle working in his jaw. Emily kept stealing glances at this stranger who shared her features, her fingers nervously twisting a strand of hair. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken questions. "You both look so much like your father," Vanessa murmured, and something in me bristled at her invoking David's memory. She had no right to his ghost after what she'd done. When the kids retreated upstairs, ostensibly to change clothes but clearly needing space to process, she turned to me. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. "Thank you for doing what I couldn't. They're wonderful," she said, running a manicured finger along the edge of my table. "Smart, talented, well-raised." "They are," I agreed, carefully neutral, pouring more tea to occupy my shaking hands. "Despite everything." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, a detail I filed away, a warning bell I should have heeded more strongly. "I've changed, Margaret. I want to make amends. To them, to you." After she left, promising to return the next day with photo albums from their early childhood, Emily broke the silence that had fallen over the living room. She stood by the window, watching Vanessa's rental car disappear down the street. "She seems nice?" The statement lifted at the end, becoming a question. Jason was more reserved, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "Why now? After 10 years?" He kicked gently at the carpet. "Why show up at graduation, of all times?" I couldn't answer, but watching them process this sudden reappearance, I felt a premonition of trouble that kept me awake long after they'd gone to bed. Their bedroom lights flicked on and off throughout the night as they texted each other from across the hallway, trying to make sense of the day's events. The insurance documents in David's box suddenly seemed urgent, glowing in my mind like a warning sign. "Tomorrow," I promised myself, pulling the blankets tighter. Tomorrow I'd review them properly. Over the following weeks, Vanessa became a fixture in our lives, like an exotic plant suddenly transplanted into our modest garden. She arrived bearing thoughtfully chosen gifts: rare sheet music for Jason, a professional microscope for Emily, never extravagant enough to raise suspicion, yet significant enough to impress. Each present seemed to whisper, "See what you've been missing all these years." "I'm staying at the Westbrook Inn until I find a rental nearby," she explained one afternoon, stirring sugar into her tea with precise movements. The spring sunlight caught the small diamond on her finger. "New money," I noted silently. "I want to be close to you both, make up for lost time." I watched with growing unease as she peppered Jason with questions about his upcoming piano competition and the prize money. Her interest seemed excessive, focused on specific details: how the funds would be dispersed, whether the competition organizers provided management contracts. My suspicion grew when she casually inquired about Jason's bank accounts. During these conversations, Emily mentioned my postponed heart surgery, her teenage indiscretion revealing more than she intended. Grandma's been putting it off for months to pay for Jason's master classes. Vanessa's eyes widened with practiced concern, her hand flying to her throat dramatically. "Margaret, you shouldn't sacrifice your health. Perhaps I could help financially now." She reached across the table to pat my hand, her touch cool and light. "That's what family is for, isn't it?" I declined politely, noticing how the children exchanged glances, a silent communication I couldn't quite decipher. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the awkward silence that followed. One evening, while preparing dinner, I found Jason researching Juilliard deferment policies on his laptop at the kitchen table. The chicken I was seasoning forgotten, I peered over his shoulder. "What's this?" I asked, unable to keep the concern from my voice. The familiar knot of worry tightened in my chest. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The browser tabs showed searches for music producers Los Angeles and alternative music career paths. Mom knows some music producers in California. She thinks I could leverage the competition to build connections before committing to conservatory. He didn't meet my eyes, focusing instead on the screen. Maybe take a gap year, get real-world experience. My stomach tightened, the knife in my hand suddenly heavy. "Jason, Juilliard has been your dream since you were 12. You've worked toward it through everything, even when we couldn't afford proper lessons." His expression hardened, a new defiance I'd never seen before, flashing in his eyes. "Maybe my dreams are evolving. Mom says the industry values connections over degrees these days. Music is changing. Conservatories are old-fashioned. Mom says," the phrase jabbed like a needle. Just 3 weeks, and already Mom had become the authority. The woman who'd abandoned him was suddenly the expert on his future. That night, Patricia arrived unannounced, the sunset casting long shadows across my front porch as she stepped inside. Her face was grave as she declined my offer of tea, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest like armor. "Margaret, I received an inquiry about your guardianship case today." She perched on the edge of my couch, avoiding the broken spring. "Vanessa Wilson has requested reevaluation." My hands trembled as I lowered myself into my chair, the ancient springs creaking beneath me. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler ticked rhythmically, counting down seconds of the life I'd built. On what grounds? Rehabilitation and life stability. She's claiming she's equipped to resume custody. Patricia hesitated, lines deepening around her mouth. The children are of an age where their preferences carry significant weight with the court. The implications hung in the air between us, unspoken but clear. After she left, I stood in my darkened kitchen, watching the moon rise over the backyard where Jason and Emily had built countless snowmen, launched science projects, practiced for talent shows. I called my friend Evelyn, whose son worked in law enforcement. The digital clock on the stove blinked 11:47 p.m. as I whispered, "I need information on Vanessa Wilson, last known residence in California. Anything you can find." 2 days later, Evelyn delivered a manila envelope, her usually cheerful face somber. "Public records only," she warned, squeezing my hand. "Be careful, Margaret. Don't do anything that could jeopardize your standing with the court." Inside, I found court documents from a car accident settlement, $200,000 awarded to Vanessa 2 years ago. Not the 3 she'd claimed. Employment verification showed she'd only worked at the rehabilitation center for 8 months, not 3 years. Her sobriety timeline was a fabrication. Most concerning was a scrap of paper I found in the kitchen trash after one of her visits. Lawyer's notes with custody reversion and future competition earnings underlined. Connected by arrows to insurance policy maturity. My blood ran cold, my heart pounding dangerously, sending shooting pains down my left arm. I finally opened David's insurance documents completely. The pages trembled in my hands as I read. What I saw made me sink into a chair, legs suddenly unable to support me. $500,000, payable to his children when Jason turned 21, less than 2 years away, with me listed only as temporary guardian of the funds. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. The timing of her return, the interest in Jason's competition, the careful cultivation of the children's affection. Vanessa hadn't changed at all. She'd simply found a new addiction, money, and my grandchildren were the pathway to her next fix. "You're being paranoid," Jason insisted the next evening when I tried showing him the evidence I'd gathered. Rain pattered against the windows, matching the tension in the room. "People change, Grandma. Mom's been nothing but supportive." We stood in the kitchen, my carefully assembled documents spread across the table between us like battle lines. The overhead light flickered intermittently, another repair I'd postponed. "Look at the dates, Jason." I pointed to the employment records. "She's only worked at that clinic for 8 months, not 3 years. She's lying about her sobriety timeline." He shoved the papers away, shoulders rigid with teenage certainty. "So she exaggerated a little. Who doesn't on their resume? That doesn't make her some kind of criminal." Emily was equally dismissive, leaning against the doorframe with arms crossed defensively. Her new earrings, a gift from Vanessa, caught the light as she shook her head. "She made mistakes, but she's trying to make it right. Why can't you give her a chance? Is it so hard to believe someone might actually change?" Their defensiveness wounded me deeply. 10 years of midnight fevers, school projects, bandaged knees, and financial juggling. Had it all been so easily forgotten? The distance between us seemed to grow wider by the day, a chasm I couldn't bridge. "I want you to be careful. That's all," I said finally, gathering the papers with trembling hands. "Things aren't always what they seem." After they retreated upstairs, the familiar sound of their bedroom doors closing almost simultaneously, I contacted Michael Green, the attorney who'd helped with the original guardianship filing. His office smelled of leather and paper, comfortingly old-fashioned in a world that seemed to be shifting beneath my feet. "These documents are concerning," he admitted, reviewing my findings, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "The discrepancies in employment, the timing with the insurance policy maturity." He tapped a pencil against his desk. "But legally, you've only maintained temporary guardianship. The courts favor biological parents, especially with nearly adult children who can voice preferences. So I have no recourse?" The words tasted bitter. Outside his window, pigeons gathered on the ledge, oblivious to human concerns. He hesitated, removing his glasses to clean them methodically with a handkerchief. "Document everything. Any sign of relapse, financial exploitation, or neglect. Keep records of all gifts, suggestions, changes in behavior. Without concrete evidence of current harm, it's your word against hers." That evening, Emily came home wearing expensive new clothes, designer jeans and a leather jacket I could never afford. When I questioned her, she shrugged, tossing her shopping bag onto the kitchen counter with teenage nonchalance. "Mom says I don't have to dress like we're poor anymore." She examined her reflection in the microwave door, adjusting her new necklace. "She says appearance matters when you're networking." The comment stung like a slap. I gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles whitening. "We've never been poor," I said quietly, thinking of the hidden sacrifices, the pawned jewelry, the second mortgage, the retirement funds depleted for their benefit. Careful with money isn't the same as poor. She rolled her eyes in that particularly teenage way that managed to dismiss an entire lifetime of experience. "Whatever. Mom says I don't even need college if I have the right connections. She knows people in modeling." Alarm bells rang in my head. "You're 16, Emily. Education comes first. You've always wanted to be a scientist." "God, you're so old-fashioned," she muttered, stomping upstairs. The slam of her bedroom door reverberated through the house, shaking the family photos on the wall. Later that week, Jason announced he might use his potential competition winnings to visit California with Vanessa to meet industry people instead of focusing on Juilliard. We stood in the living room, the piano that had been his sanctuary now a silent witness. "College isn't the only path to success," he parroted, clearly echoing Vanessa's words. Mozart didn't need a degree. Neither did Ray Charles. I felt them slipping away, seduced by promises I feared would evaporate like morning dew once their usefulness ended. The children I'd raised, practical, hard-working, with their feet firmly on the ground, were transforming before my eyes into strangers chasing illusions. My suspicions were confirmed when I discovered a legal notepad Vanessa had left behind after one of her increasingly frequent visits. Scrawled in her handwriting, contest prize accessible immediately at 19. Trust fund requires 21. Explore guardian removal options. In the margin, calculations estimating how much could be accessed before Jason's 21st birthday. When I confronted her by phone, her tone changed instantly from saccharine to steel. "You've had them for 10 years, Margaret," she hissed, dropping the concerned mother act. "Don't you think it's my turn? They're my children." "They're not possessions to take turns with," I replied, trembling with anger and fear. "And they're not lottery tickets either." Her laugh was cold, echoing through the phone like ice cracking. "Be careful, Margaret. At your age, stress can be so dangerous for the heart." The threat wasn't subtle, and suddenly I understood exactly what I was dealing with. A predator who'd found her way back to the nest, eyeing the fledglings not with maternal love, but with calculated greed. "We need space," Jason announced the following Saturday. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, making the moment seem surreally bright for such dark words. He stood with his overnight bag already packed, Emily hovering behind him, her expression a mixture of defiance and guilt. My teacup clattered against its saucer, hot liquid sloshing over the rim and onto my trembling fingers. "You're moving out? Just like that?" Emily wouldn't meet my eyes, studying the worn linoleum floor as if it contained fascinating secrets. Her new highlights, another of Vanessa's improvements, caught the light. "It's not forever, Grandma. Just, we need to get to know her, figure things out." "After 10 years of her absence," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. The pain in my chest wasn't just emotional anymore. I pressed a hand against my sternum, trying to steady my breathing. 10 years when she never called, never sent a birthday card, never asked about your lives. Jason's expression hardened, his jaw setting in that stubborn way that reminded me painfully of David. "That's not fair. She was sick. She's better now. People deserve second chances. And conveniently interested in your lives right before a major competition and insurance payout," I countered, pushing back from the table. The chair legs scraped harshly against the floor. "Doesn't that timing seem strange to you?" Emily's face flushed, spots of angry color appearing on her cheeks. She stepped forward, hands clenched at her sides. "See? This is why we need space. You're just jealous because she's younger and gets us better than you do. She understands what we want from life." The cruel teenage barb hit its mark with surgical precision. I'd expected such tactics from Vanessa, but not from the girl who'd crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd made me handprint cards every Mother's Day because I was better than a mom. "She doesn't even know you," I whispered, feeling suddenly very old. "She doesn't know that you're allergic to strawberries, Emily, or that Jason still sleeps with his childhood stuffed bear hidden under his pillow. She doesn't know about the nightmares, or your favorite books, or how hard you both worked to overcome what she did to you." But my words fell on deaf ears. They stood united against me, a wall of youth and possibility, seduced by Vanessa's glamour and promises. The distance between us seemed insurmountable, widened by the chasm of adolescent certainty. After they left to visit Vanessa, spending increasingly more time at her new apartment across town, I called Dr. Reynolds, who had treated David during his addiction. His office was familiar. The same faded motivational posters on the wall, the same gentle ticking of the clock that had counted down my son's failed attempts at sobriety. "I can't discuss other patients," he said carefully, his weathered face compassionate but professional. "But hypothetically speaking, recovery typically requires years of consistent effort with many setbacks along the way. Sudden financial or personal instability can trigger relapse." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And if I were to observe someone claiming 3 years of recovery showing certain behavioral patterns, elaborate stories, financial focus, isolation of vulnerable parties from support systems, I would be concerned." That evening, as dark clouds gathered outside my kitchen window, Patricia stopped by, concern etched on her face. Rain began to patter against the glass, matching my darkening mood. The children called. They're requesting to formally split time between residences. She set her ever-present clipboard on the table, revealing a formal petition. Vanessa has already filed paperwork. Patricia, please, I imploded, pushing the evidence folder toward her. Look at the timing. The competition money, the insurance policy that matures soon, the way she's isolating them from school friends, changing their appearance, redirecting their ambitions. She sighed, flipping through my documentation with practiced efficiency. Her reading glasses slid down her nose as she examined the timeline I'd created. I share your concerns, Margaret. These patterns are troubling, but without evidence of current endangerment, my hands are tied. Teenage preference carries significant weight with the court. Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating the kitchen in stark white light. The thunder that followed seemed to underscore the gravity of our conversation. 2 weeks later, Jason performed at the Chicago Music Competition. For the first time in his musical career, I wasn't invited. The rejection stung like physical pain. On social media, Vanessa posted photos of them together in the ornate concert hall, his second-place trophy and $25,000 prize prominently displayed. Her arm draped possessively around his shoulders, her smile triumphant. "New beginnings with my talented son," read the caption. The comments below were filled with praise for the dedicated mother supporting her child's dreams. That night, alone in the house that suddenly seemed too large and too empty, I finally scheduled my heart surgery. There was no reason to postpone it any longer, no one to save my strength for. The day they officially moved out was unseasonably cold for spring. A bitter wind cut through my cardigan as I stood on the porch, watching them load suitcases into Vanessa's new SUV, purchased, I suspected, with Jason's prize money. The vehicle gleamed in the pale sunshine, as out of place in our modest neighborhood as Vanessa herself. "We'll visit all the time," Emily promised, fiddling with the zipper of her new designer jacket. Her eyes darted everywhere but my face, guilt and excitement warring in her expression. Her room upstairs was half empty now, posters and photographs removed from walls, leaving behind ghost rectangles on the faded paint. Jason hugged me stiffly, his cologne unfamiliar. Another of Vanessa's improvements. He'd cut his hair too, the pianist's flowing locks replaced by something more commercial, more marketable. "I'll call you after we get settled. It's not that far away, Gran." When I tried to give him a scrapbook of his performances I'd kept through the years, piano recitals from age 7 to his recent competition victories, he shrugged, already backing toward the car where Vanessa waited. Engine running. "No room for it now, Grandma. Can you keep it for me? I'll get it later." The diminutive, Grandma instead of his usual Gran, felt like another severing, another small death. Even the language between us had changed, grown formal and distant. "Your medication," I said, holding out the paper bag from the pharmacy. "Don't forget your allergy pills, Emily." She took them with barely a glance, tossing them into her oversized purse. "Mom already bought me the non-drowsy kind. These make me sleepy in class." As their taillights disappeared down my street, I collapsed onto the porch steps, the emptiness of the house behind me yawning like an abyss. The neighbor's cat, a frequent visitor when the children were home, watched me curiously from the garden wall, then turned away, sensing perhaps that the household that had offered treats and affection had fundamentally changed. Inside, their absence was a physical presence. I wandered from room to room, touching abandoned objects, Emily's childhood stuffed rabbit, deemed too childish to take, Jason's first music theory textbook, a family photo they'd left behind, the three of us at the lake 2 summers ago, ice cream and laughter frozen in time. The promised visits became increasingly rare and tense. When they did come, arriving in Vanessa's luxury car, they perched awkwardly on the edges of my furniture, like visitors in a museum, no longer at home in the spaces they'd grown up in. They brought stories of auditions and industry meetings Vanessa was arranging, their eyes bright with excitement I couldn't share. "Mom's negotiating with a record producer for me," Jason mentioned during one such visit, checking his phone every few minutes as if expecting an important call. His fingers, once disciplined to practice scales for hours, now tapped restlessly, impatiently. I had to transfer my prize money to a joint account to cover some preliminary studio time. "It's a really big opportunity." My blood ran cold. I set down my teacup carefully, afraid my shaking hands would betray my alarm. Jason, that money was for your education. For Juilliard. His expression closed, a door slamming shut. This is my education. A different kind. Mom says real-world experience is worth more than classroom theory. I noticed subtle changes with each visit. Emily wearing heavy makeup, looking older than her 16 years. Her school backpack replaced by designer purses. Jason checking his phone constantly. Dark circles under his eyes, jumping at unexpected sounds. When I asked if everything was all right, they bristled defensively, exchanging glances before assuring me everything was awesome, and I was worrying too much as usual. 3 weeks after my surgery, which proved more challenging than expected for someone my age, leaving me weaker than I'd anticipated, Diane, a mother from Emily's school, appeared at my door. Her face was pinched with concern as she stood on my porch, clutching her handbag. "I saw your granddaughter at a party last weekend," she said hesitantly, lowering her voice though we were alone. "At the Larsons' lake house. There were adults providing alcohol to minors. When I tried to intervene, a man said she was under her mother's supervision. Margaret," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "The men there were much older than the girls. I didn't like what I was seeing." My heart stuttered painfully in my chest. I gripped the doorframe for support, the surgical scar pulling tight beneath my blouse. "Was Jason there too?" She shook her head. "I didn't see him, but Emily seemed not herself. I thought you should know." I immediately called Patricia to report my concerns, my voice shaking as I relayed what Diane had told me. The phone felt heavy in my hand, the distance between me and my grandchildren suddenly vast and terrifying. She promised to investigate, but warned, without concrete evidence, our options are limited. Teenagers often experiment with boundary-pushing behaviors. It doesn't necessarily indicate parental neglect, but her professional caution did little to ease the dread settling in my stomach like lead. That night I barely slept, images of David's decline replaying in my mind, overlaid now with fears for his children. Determined, I began documenting everything. Emily's school reporting increased absences, Jason canceling piano lessons with the teacher who'd mentored him for years, neighbors mentioning frequent loud parties at Vanessa's apartment. I created a timeline, noting every behavioral change, every canceled visit, every evasive answer. Then came the call that changed everything. Dr. Reynolds, after a routine checkup with Jason, contacted me. His voice on the phone was grave. "I can't violate confidentiality," he said carefully, each word measured. "But as his former guardian, you should request a welfare check." I noticed concerning signs consistent with a stressful environment and possible substance exposure. My hands went numb. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that if I were in your position, I would contact the authorities immediately. Today. Now." I forwarded all my documentation to Patricia, my finger trembling as I pressed send. She called back within the hour, her professional detachment finally cracking. "I've scheduled an unannounced visit for tomorrow evening. If we find anything concerning, we'll take immediate action." 2 days later, my phone rang at 10 p.m. The harsh electronic tone cut through the silence of my empty house. Patricia's voice was tense, urgent. "Mrs. Wilson, come to social services immediately. We found a situation." The fluorescent lights of the social services office cast harsh shadows across Emily's tear-streaked face. The institutional green walls and linoleum floor created a backdrop of sterile efficiency for the human drama unfolding within. Huddled in a plastic chair, arms wrapped around herself like armor, my granddaughter looked so much younger than her 16 years, a child again, vulnerable and frightened. "What happened?" I rushed to her, ignoring the pain in my healing chest. The scent of antiseptic couldn't mask the faint smell of alcohol and cigarettes clinging to her clothes. A social worker I didn't recognize hovered nearby, clipboard in hand, her expression professionally neutral. Patricia pulled me aside, her voice low, tension evident in the tight lines around her mouth. "We conducted an unannounced visit and found the apartment in disarray, evidence of alcohol and possibly other substances. Food was scarce, bills unpaid despite the recent influx of money." She hesitated, glancing at Emily. Vanessa wasn't present. Emily was alone with 2 adult males she couldn't properly identify. They left quickly when we arrived. My blood ran cold, a chill spreading through my body that had nothing to do with the office's aggressive air conditioning. I gripped the edge of a nearby desk for support. "And Jason? Where is my grandson?" "Unknown." According to Emily, he left with Vanessa and some men for business meetings related to his music. She hasn't seen him since yesterday morning. Patricia's professional facade cracked slightly, genuine concern showing through. We've alerted the police. They're looking for him now. When Patricia stepped away to make calls, her hushed voice urgent in the corner, Emily collapsed against me. The familiar scent of her shampoo, at least that hadn't changed, mingled with unfamiliar perfume as she buried her face against my shoulder. Her body shook with silent sobs. She never changed, did she? It was all lies. Her words came in broken gasps between tears. I feel so stupid, Grandma. So stupid. Between sobs, she revealed a story that made my heart ache. The promised opportunities never materialized. The modeling contacts were photographers who took provocative photos in hotel rooms. The apartment was often filled with strangers at all hours. Recently, Vanessa had begun bringing investors to meet Jason while encouraging Emily to be friendly with them. She kept talking about some big insurance money we'd get when Jason turned 21, Emily whispered, her voice small in the quiet office. Distant phones rang in other departments, a surreal soundtrack to our nightmare. Said it was our ticket to a better life away from here. But then she started needing money now, for contacts, for appointments, for special clothes. Jason gave her his prize money. When that ran out, she couldn't continue, fresh tears overwhelming her. I held her trembling body, fury and fear battling within me. My surgical scar pulled painfully as I tightened my embrace, but physical discomfort meant nothing compared to the emotional agony before me. "You're safe now," I whispered into her hair, rocking slightly as I had when she was small. "I'm here. We'll find Jason." Patricia returned, her expression grim but determined. She'd removed her blazer, rolled up her sleeves, a woman moving from bureaucracy to emergency response. "We've dispatched officers to locations Vanessa frequents. Child Protective Services has issued an emergency custody order returning both minors to your care. We're not waiting for a hearing." The clock on the wall ticked past midnight as we waited, Emily eventually falling into exhausted sleep against my shoulder. The office emptied, leaving only essential staff. Patricia brought blankets, coffee, made calls that echoed in the quiet building. I stroked Emily's hair, remembering nights spent in hospital waiting rooms with David, the same helpless dread coursing through me. Hours later, my phone rang, the sound startling in the quiet room. Emily jerked awake, eyes wide with fear until she recognized her surroundings. The caller ID showed the local hospital. Jason had been found at an upscale bar across town, visibly disoriented and unable to properly identify himself. Vanessa and 2 men were with him, discussing contract terms for his musical career with a supposed producer. When police arrived, responding to the welfare check, they discovered Jason had been given sedatives without his knowledge, to help with performance anxiety, Vanessa claimed. Toxicology screening at the hospital confirmed the presence of benzodiazepines mixed with alcohol, a dangerous combination that could have been fatal. Vanessa was taken into custody for child endangerment and contributing to the delinquency of minors. When I arrived at the hospital, pushing past my own physical limitations to reach him, Jason couldn't look at me. He lay in the hospital bed, IV delivering fluids to his system, looking smaller somehow. His confident posture collapsed into shame. The fluorescent lights highlighted the dark circles under his eyes, the weight he'd lost, the tremor in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. Tears tracked silently down his face. "I wanted to believe her so badly. He couldn't continue. I took his hand, careful of the IV, noting how his pianist's fingers were now bitten to the quick. We all want to believe in second chances, especially from the people who should love us most. I brushed his hair back from his forehead, the way I used to when he was small and frightened. "That's not weakness, Jason. That's humanity." That night, with both children asleep in their old rooms, I sat on my porch steps and finally allowed myself to weep for what they'd endured, for what could have happened, and for the innocence they'd lost twice over. The moon cast long shadows across my small garden, where Emily's science projects and Jason's summer music practice had once filled warm afternoons with life and promise. Tomorrow would bring police statements, court hearings, and the long road of healing. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, they were home. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act. While the children were temporarily returned to my care under emergency provisions, we faced daily meetings with social workers, police officers, and court-appointed advocates. Despite my recent surgery, which left me winded after even modest exertion, I never missed an appointment. The circular scar on my chest pulled tight whenever I reached for files or straightened in uncomfortable waiting room chairs. The institutional maze of family court became our second home. Its beige walls, metal detectors, and hushed conversations now familiar territory. Emily spoke in whispers, as if afraid to disturb the weight of legal proceedings around us. Jason moved through the halls with hunched shoulders. His musician's posture collapsed under shame and confusion. The police investigation revealed the full extent of Vanessa's deception, each new detail more disturbing than the last. Her phone, seized during her arrest, contained browser searches for talented children of deceased parents that led her to news articles about Jason's scholarship. Text messages with her boyfriend discussed the big payday when Jason turned 21, referring to him as their golden ticket and investment. Most disturbing were messages about using Emily's looks to entertain clients and keep investors happy. Photos on the phone showed my granddaughter at parties with men 3 times her age, looking uncomfortable but forcing smiles. During a supervised visit at the social services office, their temporary neutral ground, I watched Emily's face crumble as Patricia gently explained what they'd discovered. The harsh overhead lighting seemed to age her, shadows gathering under her eyes. She was using us? This whole time? Emily's voice was small, childlike. She twisted a tissue between her fingers until it shredded. Everything she said about loving us and wanting to make amends. Jason, still processing the trauma of being drugged, stared at his hands resting on the scratched metal table. His fingers, those gifted hands that could coax such beauty from piano keys, were still now, as if their purpose had been forgotten. She said we needed to trust her, that you were too old to understand the modern music industry. She talked about connections and opportunities. His voice caught. I wanted so badly to believe I was special enough that someone would come back for me, that she didn't just throw us away. I reached across the table, my heart aching for them both. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee, the backdrop to so many family tragedies. You have nothing to feel guilty about. She manipulated everyone. Your father, doctors, the court, me. She's very good at appearing changed when it serves her purpose. Patricia, who'd watched over our family for a decade, sighed heavily. Her usually immaculate bun had come loose, strands of gray hair escaping after days of emergency response. We should have recognized the warning signs earlier, but she chose her timing perfectly. When you were at an age to question authority and naturally curious about your biological mother. The police detective assigned to our case, a weathered woman with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, laid out folders of evidence. We've found similar patterns in 3 other cities. She targets vulnerable families, especially those with insurance policies or potential income sources. The rehabilitation center job was real, but she was fired for stealing prescription medications after 6 months. Later that night, as we settled back into our old routines, Jason paused at the piano he'd neglected for months. Dust had gathered on the keys, something that would have been unthinkable before Vanessa's return. His fingers brushed the ivory tentatively, not pressing down, just reconnecting. I don't know if I want to play anymore, he confessed, his voice barely audible in the quiet living room. The familiar instrument that had been his sanctuary now seemed tainted. She's poisoned it somehow, made it about money and contracts instead of what it always was for you, I finished, sitting beside him on the bench that held the impressions of countless hours of practice. Joy, expression, connection. He played a few hesitant notes, the sound hanging in the air between us, then looked at me with tears in his eyes, the question naked on his face. How do we know what's real anymore? How do we trust anyone? Time, I said simply, placing my hand on his. Time reveals what's genuine. Always has. The quick, dramatic gestures, those are easy to fake. It's the daily showing up, the quiet consistency that tells the truth about love. Emily appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her old childhood blanket despite the warm evening. She looked younger without the makeup Vanessa had insisted upon, her face scrubbed clean. Can I sleep in here tonight? On the couch? The request reminded me of thunderstorms years ago, when she'd drag her pillow into the living room rather than admit she was frightened. Of course, I said, making room as she curled beside me. We're all staying close tonight. The courtroom was silent as the judge reviewed the evidence. Afternoon sunlight streamed through high windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. The polished wooden benches were hard and unforgiving beneath me as I sat with my grandchildren, all of us dressed in our best clothes, as if proper attire might somehow influence justice. Vanessa, released on bail, sat across the aisle with an expensive attorney in a tailored suit. She'd transformed again. Gone were the designer clothes and confident posture. Today she wore modest attire, hair pulled back simply, the picture of contrition, a performance tailored for the court. My client had a minor relapse, but is committed to recovery, her lawyer insisted. Standing to address the judge, his voice carried smoothly through the courtroom, practiced and persuasive. These are her biological children, and she deserves another chance to be their mother. We're requesting supervised visitation with a path to reunification. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and penetrating eyes, seemed to be considering it, her expression thoughtful as she reviewed the file before her. My heart sank. Despite everything, the system still favored biological parents. I squeezed Emily's hand as she tensed beside me. Then Jason suddenly stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Your Honor, may I speak? With permission granted, he stepped forward to the witness stand. The oath was administered, his "I do" barely audible in the hushed courtroom. Then, finding his courage, he described how Vanessa systematically undermined his educational ambitions with empty promises, used his prize money to pay old debts, and how he was drugged during a supposed business meeting. She told me Juilliard was a waste of time when I could be making money immediately, he said, his voice growing stronger. When I hesitated to withdraw my application, she started suggesting that my grandmother was holding me back out of selfishness. His hands gripped the edge of the witness stand. She had me believing that someone who sacrificed everything for me was actually my enemy. Emily, finding her courage, requested to speak next. Her testimony was halting at first, but gained strength as she revealed how her mother introduced her to older men as a future model, while whispering to be extra nice to certain investors. There were parties where I was the only teenager, she said, her voice small but steady. When I said I wanted to go home, she told me I was embarrassing her, that this was how the real world worked, and I needed to grow up. She looked directly at Vanessa for the first time. She said Grandma had made me soft, and that wouldn't get me anywhere in life. The final blow came when Patricia presented the recovered text messages from Vanessa's phone, displayed on a screen for the court to see. The most damning read, "The old lady will be dead in a few years anyway. Once we get the insurance money, we can bail. The kids, they'll figure it out." A murmur ran through the courtroom. I felt physically ill, my surgical scar throbbing in time with my racing heart. Beside me, Emily made a small, wounded sound, while Jason's face hardened into something I'd never seen before, a protective fury that aged him beyond his years. Vanessa, seeing defeat approaching in the judge's expression, dropped her facade entirely. She stood abruptly, her lawyer attempting to restrain her with a hand on her arm. "You owe me this," she shouted, pointing at her children. Spittle flew from her lips as security stepped closer. "You think carrying you for 9 months was easy? You ruined my life once, and now you're doing it again. They're my children." The judge interrupted sharply, her gavel coming down with a crack that echoed through the suddenly silent room. "Mrs. Wilson, I believe we've seen enough. Bailiff, please control the defendant." As Vanessa was escorted back to her seat, her lawyers whispered admonishments audible in the silence. The judge made her ruling. Permanent guardianship was granted to me, with Vanessa's parental rights severely restricted. Any future contact would require court approval and supervision, contingent on completion of an extended rehabilitation program and psychiatric evaluation. Later, as we left the courthouse with permanent guardianship papers clutched in my trembling hands, I noticed both teenagers standing taller, as if weights had been lifted from their shoulders. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as we descended together. "What happens to her now?" Emily asked quietly, watching as Vanessa was escorted to a waiting police car for processing on the criminal charges. "She'll face trial for the endangerment charges, possibly serve time," I explained, my arm around her shoulders. "But more importantly, she can never threaten your security again. The judge has ordered the insurance funds placed in a protected trust that neither she nor I can access until you're both 25. Jason hesitated before asking the question I could see had been haunting him. Do you think she ever loved us at all? Even a little? I considered my answer carefully, watching a sparrow hop along the courthouse railing. I think she loves you in the only way she knows how, which is unfortunately through the lens of what you can do for her. Real love is different. It gives without expecting return. That evening, as we shared our first peaceful meal at home in months, Emily looked up from her plate. The kitchen light caught the tears in her eyes, but they were healing tears now, not the desperate ones of recent weeks. Grandma, remember when I said you were old-fashioned and didn't understand things? She set down her fork, hands trembling slightly. I nodded, smiling slightly as I reached for my water glass. I believe the term ancient might have been used at one point. She laughed, a small, fragile sound, but genuine. I was wrong, she said simply. You understood everything. We were the ones who couldn't see, Jason added quietly. She offered us a fantasy. You gave us a foundation. He looked around the modest kitchen, seeming to truly see it for the first time in months. I'd rather build on rock than sand. I reached across the table to take their hands, my heart full, despite everything we'd endured. The road ahead would be long, trust rebuilt slowly, therapy sessions, learning to recognize manipulation, but we would walk it together. 1 year later, the garden was in full bloom as we prepared for Jason's farewell party. Roses climbed the trellis I'd installed last fall, their fragrance sweetening the air. String lights hung from tree branches, waiting for evening to transform our modest backyard into something magical. Tomorrow, he would leave for his first semester at Juilliard, having passed his deferred audition with flying colors. My recovery from surgery had been slow. Age doesn't permit miracles, but watching my grandchildren safe and thriving gave me strength that medicine couldn't provide. The house had been modified to accommodate my reduced mobility. A ramp at the entrance, extra railings on the stairs, a shower chair I pretended to use only occasionally. Small concessions to the reality of raising teenagers at 76. Jason sat at the piano we'd moved to the garden for the occasion, protected from the elements by a canopy. His fingers, confident again after months of rediscovering his passion, danced across the keys. The melody rose into the summer air, not the classical pieces he'd once focused on exclusively, but an original composition that blended classical structure with modern elements. It's called Return, he explained to our guests, neighbors, teachers, friends who'd stood by us through everything. The afternoon sunlight caught in his hair as he smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. Because sometimes we need to get lost before we can find our way back to what matters. Emily, now 17 with plans to study psychology, moved among the guests serving homemade lemonade with confident smiles. The past year had transformed her, not into the glamorous model Vanessa had envisioned, but into a young woman with purpose. She led a support group for teenagers with addicted parents at the community center, transforming her painful experience into something positive. Dr. Morales thinks I might be able to intern at the youth counseling center next summer, she told me, setting a plate of cookies on the table. He says lived experience is as valuable as textbook knowledge in this field. Michael, our attorney who had become a friend, approached with an envelope containing news. The permanent guardianship had been officially finalized, all appeals exhausted, and the insurance funds would be held in a court-supervised trust until both children turned 25, protecting them from future schemes. And Vanessa? I asked quietly, stepping away from the celebration to speak privately. Accepted the court-ordered rehabilitation program, Michael replied, his tie loosened in concession to the informal gathering. This time in a state facility without luxuries, 18 months minimum. The judge also mandated intensive counseling before any consideration of supervised visitation. It would be years, if ever. I nodded, feeling neither triumph nor sorrow, just a quiet relief that this chapter was truly closing. Thank you, Michael, for everything. No thanks needed, he said, gesturing toward Jason at the piano. Seeing that young man heading to Juilliard instead of where he might have ended up, that's payment enough. As evening fell and guests departed, the three of us settled on the porch swing I'd had widened and reinforced, me in the middle, a grandchild on each side subtly supporting my weight. The roles had shifted. They were helping care for me now too, Fireflies blinked in the garden, nature's own string lights joining our celebration. "You know what I regret most?" I said softly. "Watching the stars emerge one by one, that your father can't see you now." Jason smiled, the expression reaching his eyes now. "But he does, through your eyes. You kept him alive for us all these years. Every story, every memory." Emily rested her head on my shoulder, her hair tickling my cheek. "How did you always know we'd be okay, even when we doubted it?" I reflected for a moment, feeling every one of my 76 years and all the battles fought. The weight of my experiences, both painful and joyful, seemed suddenly valuable, worth the arthritic hands and fading energy. When you grow older, you learn that life is a marathon, not a sprint. Truth can be hidden, people can wear masks, but time always reveals what's genuine. The porch light cast a gentle glow around us, moths dancing in its halo. A dog barked in the distance, and somewhere a car door slammed, the ordinary sounds of life continuing. Jason looked at his Juilliard acceptance letter, which he'd framed as a reminder of perseverance. "You know, I think I always knew I was being deceived. I just didn't want to admit it. It was easier to believe the fantasy. We all want to believe in the people who should love us," I replied gently, covering his hand with mine. "True strength isn't never falling for these traps. It's having the courage to recognize the truth and start again." Emily yawned, reminding me she was still partly child despite her growing wisdom. "I'm keeping my support group going while Jason's away. Someone needs to continue the family tradition of stubbornness." We laughed together, the sound floating into the night air. There would be challenges ahead: college applications for Emily, Jason's adjustment to New York, my own health concerns. But the foundation beneath us was solid again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.